Meine Damen und Herren, liebe Ombudspersonen, ich danke Professor Erik Steinhauer ganz herzlich für die Einladung, meine Erfahrungen von der Universität in Oslo zu teilen. Eine Warnung ist immerhin angebracht. Ich habe sehr viel von Ihrem System gelernt und benutzt, als wir unser System von Forschungsintegrität implementierten in Oslo. Nach dem Krieg war Roosevelts Motto «Look to Norway». Unser Motto war «Look to Germany». Wir hatten viel Hilfe von Jördis Czesnek und Helga Nolte empfangen, zum Beispiel durch dieses Zoom-Seminar und auch Zoom-Konferenzen mit Teilnahme von Ihrem Ombudsgremium, Professor Renate Scheibe und Professor Daniela Mennel. Immerhin, Sie haben, denke ich, weniger von mir zu lernen, anders als vielleicht gemeinsame Probleme, die schwer zu lösen sind. Hier kann ich vielleicht etwas von meinen kurzen Erfahrungen über die letzten 4 Jahre beitragen. Denken Sie daran, ich bin nur eine lokale Ombudsperson, fast wie ein Einzelunternehmen, ein Einzelkämpfer. Auf Deutsch will ich auch sagen, dass ich von deutscher Herkunft bin. Mein Großvater, Dietrich Ruyter, zog sich nach Norwegen und gründete die erste Papiermühle in Oslo in dem 18. Jahrhundert. Vielleicht aus diesem kleinen Dörfchen in Niederzwönitz. Mein Bruder und ich haben dort unsere Wurzeln gesucht, aber die einzige Verbindung, die wir gefunden haben, war die Produktion norwegischen Tretschnitten in der Zeit von DDR. Enough of German for today, from me. Also Englisch ist auch eine Fremdsprache für mich. I promised Jördis that I would speak in English to give my presentation an international flair and perspective, even though that is very difficult when you come from the outskirts of the civilized world, im hohen Norden. But perhaps you can pretend to sit down on this Tretschnitten, and I can steer you through some of the icy and slippery grounds for research integrity in the University in Oslo. Please join me. So I'd like to say a few words about the status of the ombudsperson in Norway, and then say something about the assessments that I've done in annual reports to the university board, and also then criticism of the organization and also suggestions for improvements, which the leadership is not very happy about. Thirdly, rather than say everything about nice things that I've done, I'd rather try to identify some challenges and problems, and also system faults, not only individual faults of researchers, and at the end say something about some suggested improvements and resolutions. I'll try to do this within the minutes I have. It's difficult. Status. We started up in 2018 with a new mandate, and I think it's true to say that the ombudsperson was started because or as a part of a self-regulation of the university for research integrity, with many other types of measures. But as you see here, and you recognize it from your own system, of course, that the Science Ombuds was established as an offer, it said, for all scientifically employed staff who encounter research ethics problems. This is a quite wide definition. The function, independent, confidential, neutral, advisory. And with the advisory also a task in terms of mediation, perhaps arbitration, conflict management and so forth, and also referral of cases, for example, to the Research Ethics Committee. It was established as a position with a fixed term of 3 years as a paid position, and I have it in my contract with the university, an especially independent employee. So I cannot be instructed by anyone. Qualifications for the position was, you have to be a professor in some kind of a discipline, and you have to have some kind of competency from the area of research ethics. Those were the only ones, and I qualified, I guess. And it was established with a great speak-up system, also reporting of possible violations. So this is for all kinds of things. And as you see here, is there a little button here of some kind? Yeah. There is also one possibility for reporting violation of research ethics cases. I have had over the last few years about 100 cases per year. So I had a colleague, a professor of law, who congratulated me when I got the job. And he said, now you can put your feet on the table. You'll have a nice time for the rest of your life. Wasn't true. So it's been interesting. But I have to say, I have not been lazy in terms of being laid back. I have been very proactive at the university, and sometimes also looked up cases that I thought needed to be addressed. Here, I just show you an overview over the types of cases that I have encountered, this from the last year. And I thought that I'd be the first one today to say something about the chatbot, GPT-3. But I was wrong. But I did have 2 cases last year that actually dealt with chatbot production of text, but also, which is also very interesting, that is also the use of synthesized pictures, which are also generated from artificial intelligence. I could talk 2 hours about this, but I won't. Just one comment about chatbot, because I did, as I said, got 2 cases, and I think it's none of them were submitted as texts. I think the persons wanted to test to see if this is something that they could, submit some places. There were talk about scientific reports, and the other one was more of a preprint. But it's interesting. And some of and it's already raised here, who is then the author? Are these texts fabrications, if you don't disclose where they come from, and so forth? Can it be used as an assistant to gather data, analyze and write? Of course it can be. But should it be done without any kind of disclosure? I think no to the latter. I found a very interesting article in BioXIV, which tested a group of journal editors to see if they detected abstracts that were submitted to the journal. Did they? These plagiarism controls did not work, of course, but among referees, about half of them suspected that there were chatbot text productions. not because they recognized it, but because of the formulations and so forth in the text that they didn't consider to be genuine. But it was interesting. More of that another time. I've also seen at least 3 of them last year, the use of synthesized images. This one is from Midjourney, but they are used as though they are authentic photos, illustrating research reports. And this is just a picture, seemingly from the mountains of Norway, with these electrical masts, but they do not exist in reality. They're not there. But they try to make a point of how everything will end up if we continue with the electrification and so forth and so forth. So it's interesting, and it's almost impossible to detect. We'll leave the cases. Just one comment about where the inquiries come from. It's also a comment to Ton, which is also interesting for me, because we had expected that most cases would come from, PhD students, postdocs, and temporary junior researchers and so forth. But I think it has been very interesting that most of the cases actually come from research leaders and management, because they want to deliberate about some very difficult cases. And to that, I have actually participated quite a lot. And when you talk about courage, my task has very often been to encourage leaders to take the cases on and be willing to do something about them, because many are not. I just said one word about annual report. That's the only thing I have to do, really. But in this, I have been very concerned about 2 things. One is that my concern is not only about individual faults, but also trying to identify system weaknesses and faults at the organizational level. And there are actually quite many of them. You could talk about that another time. And as I said in the introduction, university leadership is not very appreciative of straightforward assessments, because they consider it to be a criticism, nor suggestions for system improvements. So the last annual reports, the leadership came back to me and said, why can't you write a descriptive report? Don't make any suggestions. Yeah. But the function is still, I think, strongly supported, also promoted. And the interesting thing, which I'll come back to at the end, some of the suggestions for improvement also initiated very interesting processes for change. For example, about establishment of research ethics standards at the university, training of all academic staff, because at the beginning they just wanted to educate junior staff. But I said those that need it the most are the older staff. And also very good standard operating procedures, especially for processing individual cases. I'll come back to that at the end, last slide. So I'll say something about the challenges and problems. I don't know if you recognize all of these, but I'd be very glad if you could help me. One is that many, or perhaps even most, cases remain unresolved. I don't know what your experiences are, but I think this is actually a problem. There is, strangely enough, perhaps, I hadn't expected it, resistance and unwillingness to be mediated in terms of conflict management from both sides. And if they are willing, they do not want to adhere to the result of the mediation. They want to be free to decide whatever they want. So should you put up a lot of time and effort to do this mediation if it doesn't mean anything? I find it somehow difficult sometimes to get involved in that process. Another problem that I see, perhaps since I come from the ethics part, is that there is a temptation, perhaps also an effort, to limit and narrow down the function to mere research ethics, that which is not yet, some say, regulated by law. And much of it is today, also in Norway. Much of research ethics is today codified. We have the Research Ethics Act, we have the Health Research Act. Also plagiarism is defined, also in other ways than was presented here this morning. And also understandings of when breaches of these norms occur or when they do not occur, and who should decide that. It's difficult, but my feeling sometimes is that the administration and leadership of the university want the research ethics area to be as small as possible and in their own little box. I'll also say something about problems occurred in international research and also the employment by many foreign researchers. I haven't heard any of you talked about that this far, but also a huge area that Tom mentioned, the international cross-disciplinary research, which makes it also very difficult to handle misconduct in research. Do I have time to say some few more words? Yeah. Not much, just a little. As you know, the ombudsperson, also in Norway, doesn't have any authority in a sense. So it's beratung or counseling. So it's totally up to the inquirer to follow an advice or not. And then there are many difficult cases that make it difficult to resolve these cases, and that is very much related to, I think, that many of these cases are meeting different kinds of expectations and also limitations in terms of function. For example, as I'm sure many of you also have experienced, many want me to be their advocate. And they also try, of course, to manipulate me in ways that will enhance their own case against the other, of course. And many do not want to take the risk of losing, so they do not want to get involved in any kind of mediation, and so forth. And I have asked myself sometimes, do I have a problem? Yes, I do have a problem with, for example, being so-called neutral in mediation. I think it's very hard to come by. I don't know what you think, but in the process of dealing with many of these cases, I will very often, as I say here, get convinced that there are some things that are more right than other things. Also, of course, in lieu of research guidelines. What should I then do? Should I pretend to be neutral? No, I cannot. But it is a question of how much authority I should exert, of course. Help me out. I've said a few about limit. Just a few words about internalization. Internalization is wrong. It was meant to be international research. And sometimes the problem of having researchers from around the world participating in large research projects. I don't know if you have encountered this, but we have tried to do some calibration at Upstart But I think we have very often underestimated differences in academic cultures from around the world. And we have not been sufficiently conscious about some of these differences, and they elicit a lot of different kinds of complaints from many of these researchers for different reasons. One point, I'll have two slides, and I'll then end. But I think this is an interesting problem in terms of cross-disciplinary research, and also the fact that many of the institutions that will provide funding and so forth will require that you organize the research this way. You know, cross-disciplinary, cross-countries, and so forth. For example, in the Norwegian Research Council, you see here, almost 50% of all research projects were in this category. And a whole new area, which I haven't heard any of you talk about yet, so perhaps I have a little new thing. What about transdisciplinary research? This is a nice publication from OECD, but trans in this has nothing to do with sexuality. This has to do with how do you transfer knowledge from society into the academia and the other way around. But that raises a lot of different questions that we have not dealt with yet. And I also saw this on the Humboldt University page, which I thought was very interesting. It's a very nice goal here, saying that by evolving and exchanging ideas with diverse social actors, transdisciplinary research is to be raised to a new level in the long term. That's fine, but there's hardly any reflection on these implications for research ethics. It makes it very hard in terms of the complexity of cooperation, what counts as research contribution, what shall we do with these trans participants? Are they co-researchers entitled to co-authorship? Are trans participants included in the process of developing practice, etc., etc.? You see the problem? No one talks about it. I'll skip that one, and I'll have this as a last slide, just to say a few things about some of these improvements that we've tried to implement and in the process of implementing. We agreed to make a standard of research integrity for all scientific staff at the university, to give a content to research and integrity, and to which every researcher is accountable. I thought that was very interesting, because all of the acts in Norway say that we should adhere to recognized research ethics norms. But who has recognized them? And what is their content? So it was tried to resolve it this way. Also guidelines for processing, but perhaps the most important part has to do with the work for training of all scientific staff, and also administrative research support staff, which was now also approved by the President, and this will be implemented next year. Perhaps, since Ton is also here, I should just point out that we made a few other options than the Lehrer recommendation. We did choose a top-down approach in one single format for all scientific staff, not tailor-made for specific disciplines, though, of course, with the possibility for faculties to supplement training in specific areas. But this had both to do with the fact that we think that there are more similarities for all disciplines than differences in terms of research integrity, and that it is easier to implement it with the legitimacy of the university to get it done by every scientific staff. And it will be mandatory I have also pleaded for certification, but it's not been supported. Yes. I think Lerud has a very good point in saying that we need to install the right incentives, especially for authorship. But this is something that we cannot achieve through training. But I would have loved to see this changed, especially away from biometrical impact factors and so forth. But the interesting thing with my university is that they refused, for example, to sign the DORA declaration. It's very hard to get by, and very many of these authorship difficulties, they are very much also related to this problem of incentives and the manipulation of authorship criteria. Thank you.